Okay, the title is Desperation and Faith. And like Mark said, desperation, the first thing that a lot of times people think of with desperation is being destitute, being in total despair. But you can be desperate for a hug from your grandkid. You can be desperate for lunch, if you're hungry. You can be desperate for more of God. So that's, before I get into the actual this is going to be basically based off two stories in one that are kind of one interrupts the other of Jesus. But I wanted to give just a little bit of a prelude, that's a musical term, a preface to what took me to these stories. And that was, I've been just getting for months and months, just such a burning desire that I just want to impact people like Jesus did. It takes so much more. Jesus wasn't just a good person. He didn't treat he was, everything he did was good, and he treated people with goodness. But he did so much more than that. He changed lives. He impacted lives. He just didn't help people. And so like it says in Acts 10 about how God anointed Jesus of Nazareth with the Holy Ghost and with power, who went about doing good and healing all that were oppressed of the devil, for God was with him. He came with such life. He changed lives from when he was even a baby, when he was even still in the womb, and Mary walked into the same room with Elizabeth. It changed John the Baptist, who was still wasn't even born yet. And Jesus wasn't even born yet. And he was already changing lives. So how he went about doing good with the power of God, was that just Jesus's job, or is that for us too? While Jesus was still on the earth, he sent out his 12, and then he sent out about 70 or 72, depending upon which manuscript you look at, to do exactly the same thing that he did. He said, go in my name, heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, preach the gospel. So it wasn't just Jesus's job, it's for me. And so after his resurrection, he said, all power or authority in heaven and in earth has been given unto me. Have you ever thought really about that? You think all authority in heaven, all authority on earth has been given to Jesus. So what does that leave out? He has authority over everything. He has, like he proved it when he walked on this earth, he could calm the wind. He could walk on the water. He could, after he stepped into the boat with the disciples, then the whole boat was up on the other side of the lake. You just think there was nothing in the natural realm, in heaven and in earth, that was not under his authority. There was nothing in the spiritual realm that was not under his authority. And what I thought was kind of interesting is that you think about when Jesus, right after he was baptized in water, filled with the Spirit, and the Spirit drove him into the wilderness for 40 days. And you think, and then Satan came and tempted him. And you think, what's one of the things that Satan tempted him with? He says, if you'll only bow down and worship me, I'll give you, the kingdoms of the earth, they're all mine. I give them to whoever I want. I'll give them to you if you worship me. That's like a bold-faced lie. If all authority in heaven and earth was given to Jesus, the authority that Satan had at that time, really he stole it. He took it from man, who God had given man, Adam, authority, dominion, over the earth that he placed man in. Satan didn't have that authority, but he stole it from man when he tricked man, and man sinned and lost that dominion that he had. Well, Jesus, it was kind of silly to think. I mean, Satan thought that he had Jesus, because he was hungry, and he was been out in the wilderness for 40 days. He tried everything he could, but you think it's just, he doesn't have anything but lies. But anyway, so I thought, we're called to go do just like Jesus did. And so how do we learn to use that authority? It's real. It's his authority. All authority in heaven and in earth. And he sent 12 out. He sent 70 out to do exactly the same thing. He's told us to do exactly the same thing. So how do we learn how to use that authority? Well, we follow his example. So now I'm going to get into these two stories. So as I was just aching in my life to step into more real power, real authority, I thought I just wanted to just study, read in the Word. How could I follow his examples? And I thought about, the story about where there was the woman who had the issue of blood for 12 years and came to Jesus, and Jesus felt the power leave, and that woman felt that power. And I thought, so that's what took me to these two stories, because I thought, well, if I want to learn about his power and his authority and using it, releasing it, that's kind of the first story I came to. And so it's really the two stories in one, because you've got the father that was desperate, who came to Jesus, and then because he had a daughter that was at the point of death. And while they were going to his house, that story was interrupted by this woman that had a hemorrhage for 12 years. So I'm going to start with the first one, the desperate father. Now I'm going to do this a little different. Instead of quoting scriptures as I go through, I'm just going to give you, if you want to look them up later, it's easy to find, Matthew 9, Mark 5, Luke 8. It's in all three of those Gospels that kind of do a lot of the stories, the testimonies, the things that Jesus did. So it's Matthew 9, 18 to 26. That's the shortest one. Mark 5, 21 to 43. Luke 8, 40 to 56. And what I'm going to do is I just kind of pieced them together, because every one of those has got some details that the other two don't. And so the setting that this is in is Jesus had just returned from coming across the Sea of Galilee. He had gone across the sea. He'd calmed the storm, just like that first song was talking about. He'd gone over there, met that wild man that was filled with a legion of spirits, cast them all out. He was clothed in his right mind. He wanted to follow Jesus, but he said, no, you stay here, tell everybody. But the people there, because all the pigs and stuff were destroyed, I mean, there was this wild thing. They said, would you please just leave? So he got back in the boat, came back across Galilee over to Capernaum. And so this is where this story starts. So he gets out of the boat, and the people were waiting for him. So he's still on the seashore, just right on the edge of the sea. He hadn't even had time to eat or whatever. I mean, he arrives, and he's being thronged already by the crowd that is so eager to see him. And so he was still by the seashore as a large crowd gathered around him, and a leader in the synagogue named Jairus came running to Jesus, fell at his feet, and pleaded with him, my little daughter is at the point of death. Please come and lay your hands on her so that she will be healed and live. So this was Jairus' only daughter, the only one. She was 12 years old. So imagine how desperate this man was. He knew that she was very close to death. And 12 years old is way too short of a lifetime to end for this little girl. But he had a reason to come running to Jesus. Desperation without hope would be total despair. If you were desperate for something and you had no belief, no glimmer of hope that it would change, that's the desperation that people think of with desperation, destitute, despair. That's the desperation when you've got hope is just motivation. When you know you've got hope of something, that there's an answer to this, then your desperation is what drives you there. It's your motivation. So desperation channeled through that hope is a great thing. So he came running to Jesus with the hope that bringing Jesus, knowing his touch, would heal his daughter. And so this crowd wasn't just thronging Jesus when he was going to his house. The crowd was already all around Jesus, thronging him, tight in around him. But he wouldn't let the crowd pressing around Jesus keep him from reaching Jesus because he was desperate. It says he came running to Jesus. So how long had he been running? Jesus had just arrived with boat, so maybe he had just heard, hey, Jesus is back. Because he certainly would have been at his daughter's side. I mean, she was on her last breaths. So how much did he have to push his way through the crowd in order to get to Jesus and fall at his feet? So you think he's probably short of breath. He was obviously desperate. He fell at Jesus' feet and he pleading with Jesus. Would you come to my house? If you will touch my daughter, she will live. So he had faith. He had that hope. He knew if Jesus would come, his daughter would live. So think about it. When our Heavenly Father asked his son, Jesus, to come to the earth as a man, Jesus did. So of course he said yes to Jairus. I mean, that's why Jesus came to this earth, was to redeem us, to rescue us. So that's what's hard. It doesn't matter if Jesus was tired, didn't matter if he was busy, didn't matter if there's a crowd. This man said, will you come? And he did. So while they were heading on the way to Jairus' house, this is that interruption then of somebody else who's desperate for healing in her life. She had been bleeding for 12 years. She had spent all that she had on many physicians. She tried everything that she could, that she knew. But it only got worse. But this is part of life. But somebody told her about Jesus. So you think that was an ingredient, a necessary ingredient to this whole miracle happening. Because it doesn't say that she had ever seen Jesus, didn't say that she had ever been there and seen Jesus do a miracle. But somebody had told her about Jesus. But just hearing about those miraculous healings that Jesus had done, that sparked the hope in her that could be the end of her suffering. She was desperate. 12 years is way too long to have suffered. But now she had hope. And she had been saying to herself, if I just touch his garments, I will be healed. She didn't wonder it. She just said, if I could just touch his clothes, I'll be healed. So she came from behind, and again, this is as they were going to Jairus' house. So the crowd was so pressed in around him. So she came in from behind because she didn't want to be noticed. She just wanted to touch his clothes, get this wonderful healing, and then just quietly slip away, and everything was just going to be beautiful. So she got up close enough to touch just, it says the fringe, just the edge of his clothes, and immediately she felt it. As soon as that finger touched that fabric, she felt that she was healed on the inside. She felt it, and that's what I say, that's what drove me to the stories, because I've prayed and I've seen the Lord move many times, and I've felt the Lord many times, but I just think about that. Just a touch. Jesus didn't even know she was there. It wasn't, Jesus didn't say anything. Jesus didn't do anything. It's that woman that came up and touched his clothes out of faith, believing that it would do it, and it did it. So can you imagine her joy and excitement as she stepped back? It happened. That glimmer of hope, that desperation that drove her to push through all those people surrounding Jesus she didn't want to make an issue of herself, but she just wanted to get there. She did. She experienced it the second that she touched. So she was just imagine how she felt. She was healed, how excited. She would have been on cloud 9, full of joy. And so she was just wiggling her way back through the crowd, just fading away, oh, happy day. Jesus stops. He turns around and goes, "Who touched me?" He says, I like the one in one of them where it says, "Who is the one that touched me?" But while they were all denying it, Peter said, "Master, it's just the crowd pressing into you. If somebody bumped into you." And Jesus says, "No, someone did touch me because I felt power flow right out of me." He says, "I might have been bumped 100 times already today. That didn't matter. Somebody touched me." So why did Jesus stop? I especially can imagine Jairus concerned about Jesus stopping, because when he had desperately gone running away from his house when he heard that Jesus was coming, his daughter, his little girl, was gasping her last breaths. He got Jesus, Jesus was willing to come. Oh, happy day, here we go. And he stopped. I don't have all the time in the world. The moments were so precious to get to his daughter. But the woman, when she saw that she had not escaped a notice, she came trembling and fell down before Jesus, admitting in the presence of everyone there why she touched him and how she was immediately healed. And Jesus took the opportunity to speak to her. "Daughter, your faith healed you. Go in peace." Jesus stopped for that woman, even though she had already received her healing. Even though he knew he had to get to Jairus' house, this little girl was on her deathbed. And like I already said, Jesus didn't do anything. He didn't say anything. He didn't do anything to heal this woman. He said, "Your faith has healed you." And he probably wasn't even aware of her coming and her need. He'd be behind unless the Spirit had revealed to him. But Jesus did what he always did. He went out among people. He took the opportunity to impact a life, even when it wasn't convenient. He was always ready. That power was, it was there so that when she came within touching distance, it flowed. So I thought about this. Was this an interruption or was this an opportunity? This woman got what she needed, which is enough. But while Jesus was talking with the woman, Jairus saw someone coming from his house. Can you imagine this? If you were Jairus and you recognized somebody coming from your house, what would that mean? It wouldn't be a happy thought. And they spoke the worst possible fear and doubt to Jairus. I mean, that's exactly what they spoke. They were well-intending, whoever it was, but they said, your daughter has died. Don't trouble the master anymore. So think about that. That's the worst possible outcome that was staring him in his face, being spoken to him. So Jesus heard those words of that person coming up and talking to Jairus. And Jesus knew exactly how to respond to Jairus. He walked over to Jairus. He confronted that fear and that doubt head on. And it's exactly what he told Jairus. He says, do not be afraid. Only believe. She will be healed. And so I think, to me, I almost thought this was a setup. Because you obviously had this woman who needed a need, and she got it. But it was an opportunity here. Because seeing the woman instantly healed in front of his eyes provided the opportunity for his faith to rise up. You know, this wasn't an interruption. This didn't cause it to Jesus not make it in time. This was an opportunity to spark his faith, because he saw the power of God move in that woman. It was undeniable. So Jesus spoke to him. Jesus was coming to his daughter. Jesus said she was going to be healed. So just think of what that probably sparked in his heart. And I thought, the rest of the way to his house, that walk was probably easier, because things couldn't have gotten any worse. His daughter was dead. But Jesus was walking right by his side. Jesus had just healed this woman that had an issue of blood for 12 years, had been to every doctor. But his greatest hope was walking right by his side. And I thought the rest of the way to his house was probably, even though his daughter had just died, it was probably a whole lot easier than his journey had been to that point. Because he knew, Jesus told him she was going to be okay. So I thought about that, and I think life sometimes happens in the worst possible way. Or so it would seem. You could be facing a horrible outcome. I mean, he faced the worst possible outcome. His daughter died. You've got some extra delay or an obstacle. You got someone who intends to do good, but ends up piling a dose of fear and doubt on you. But it doesn't matter what life brings, because we live in a fallen world. We'll have plenty of opportunities to have to push through stuff. But the goodness of God doesn't know any limit. His faithfulness reaches under the clouds. His mercy is everlasting. His truth endures through everything. We can depend on him. He never fails. So when they came to the house, Jesus moved everyone else and all the commotion from that moment outside, and he took just Peter and James and John, Jairus and his wife, into where the girl's body was. And then this is kind of my favorite part of the whole thing. And it's a little detail that impacted me when I considered the background. This is in the Gospel of Mark, where you're going to find this. Here in this country, in the U.S., we're used to using just one language. English is our casual conversation language. We use it for business, worship services, commerce, formal occasions, education, everything. So that's kind of, you have had the benefit being in other countries where, but here in the U.S., we could get along just fine, never learning a word in another language. But there's a lot of countries in the world where their kids, when they go to school, they have to learn another language just to facilitate advancement in their life. You know, it might be English. You know, like our friends that have come from Mexico, they study English, their kids do when they go through school. Well, back in the day of when the Hebrews were taken captive, then their language changed because they were 70 years away in captivity. Most of the people that were led away in captivity were dead after 70 years. You know, if they were 30 years old or 40 years old, you had kids that were born in that country. That's the language they heard all the time. And back home, you know, it's the captors. When countries take over other countries over time, you know, the captor's language becomes the prevalent common language. That's what happened to the Hebrews. You know, when they came back home again and they started to read out of the scriptures that they had then, they were written in Hebrew. Most of the people didn't understand it. You know, so Ezra had to interpret it for the people, had to explain it to the people. So you think about Jesus, the time when he grew up in Galilee, their common everyday language was not Hebrew. Now he would have learned Hebrew because he was raised as a Jew. So he would have learned that as part of his education because all of their scrolls and everything were in Hebrew. A lot of their customs that they did were in Hebrew, but their common everyday language was Aramaic. And now you had Roman citizens like the Apostle Paul was, and wealthy individuals who were often educated in Greek as well. So you had this mix where you had different languages, but the common everyday language that Jesus would have spoken in, he would have known Hebrew. He might have known some Greek, but they would have talked every day. Like if we were just, Pam, how are you doing today? You know, what did you have for lunch, Patrick? Was in Aramaic. That was their day-to-day language. Now in the account in Mark, when it gets there where Jesus spoke 2 words to raise this girl up. And in his gospel, the 2 words there, and when I realized that this wasn't Hebrew words and this wasn't speaking in tongues, when he took that little girl by the hand and said, Talitha Kumi, they were the Aramaic words. So those were actually the words that Jesus spoke to that little girl. And when I was reading about those words, they weren't fancy formal words. Like he didn't go, boom, Satan, you get out of here. You know, these were the most tender words that Jesus could have spoken. That Talitha means little girl. That's what it literally means. But it actually was a tender, sweet term for a little girl. It's like what a daddy would call his little girl, little sweetie, little girl, you know, like if he was waking her up in the morning. You know, it wasn't just, hey girl, you know, or little girl. It was a really tender term. And Kumi just means get up, arise. So again, that's all Jesus did. He got rid of all the commotion, all the other people out. He just went in there with just Peter, James, John, mom and dad. He walked to this 12-year-old girl whose body was there, laying still as can be, just took her hand, said those 2 little words, and her spirit came back into that body. And it says she got up, she walked around. So that touched me so much because Jesus was full of power. He was full of authority. He didn't have to follow some guidelines. He didn't have to follow some formula. He had enough power that woman could coax that power out of his body just by touching the fringe of his clothes. He could bring that spirit back into that little girl's body, not by talking to the spirit, just holding the little girl's hand and saying, "Get up, little girl." So I want to end with something that happened to me when I was thinking about, because this is a desire, like I say, what drove me to this story was because I want to change my life. I'm not discontent with my life, but I want to be more like Jesus.
Amen.
I want to just not treat people good and kind and be thoughtful to them, speak kind words to them. I want to change. I want the Lord to change their life through me. And so when I was kind of pondering this, I can picture right where I was in my living room. And the Lord spoke to me and he said, "Do you remember the verses you loved as a little boy?" And when I got my first Bible, when I was raised in a Christian home, so it was a wonderful upbringing. So I got my first Bible when I was real young. And I remember a lot of times I just loved to flip to what they call the Great Commission, which is the last words of Matthew and the last words of Mark. I read it already. That's what I read when I said, "All authority in heaven and earth has been given unto me." So I sat down, I got my Bible out, and I turned to it. I read it, and I only got partway into it. And what I'm going to do, just kind of for your benefit, so you can kind of see how this impacted me, is I'm just going to swap two words around. So all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go. Therefore, go. I just turned that go, therefore, into therefore, go. Because what impacted me is I got to that word go. And I thought, this is it. This is because normally when I think about that verse, I always thought of it as a calling to go to people. And that is predominantly what that means. That's exactly what it means. Jesus says, go into nations, go everywhere you go to everybody. But it hit me different because in these two stories, well, Jesus, he was used to going to people. He would go to the temple in Jerusalem. He would go to the synagogues, which was the little places, the local places where people would go. He spent a lot of time alone with his Father. He would go seek out people like he would go seek out the tax collector. He'd go stop for Zacchaeus. He'd go look for Zacchaeus. "Come down, I'm going to your house today." So he would go to people. But in these two stories, the people came to him. And he took the time to respond. And so that's what impacted me about that. I thought this therefore go isn't just taking the time to go somewhere and talk to somebody, or you even have somebody in mind that you want to go to. But if somebody comes to you, go. And so there's kind of two things that spoke to me. One, he had to be accessible. He had to be out there. People had to be able to come to him. And then two is he had to respond. He had to respond. When people came to him, he had to be willing to he may have had other things to do, but he stopped for that woman when he had something very important to go do. And the other thing I just wanted to kind of recognize here is that Jesus he recognized that sometimes the large crowds actually hindered him from reaching people. when he presented to Jairus and his wife their daughter raised back from life, he told mom and dad, he said, don't tell anybody. Jesus didn't need any more fame. Fame had found him because as soon as he started doing miracles, he didn't need any more recognition. He didn't need any more fame. It wouldn't have meant anything to him anyway. But as soon as he started doing miracles, crowds came to him because they got fed, because they got healed, because they learned. Their lives were impacted by the way he preached. And a lot of times people just, it was too much. He couldn't even go sometimes from towns to the towns that he wanted to go to. So I just thought that it isn't our duty to serve others. If we view it as a duty, a requirement, then we can easily grow tired and get bothered. Now, it is our duty, it is our call. But if we view it as that, all we need is we need to be so full of humility that we can look on the needs of others. More important than our needs, than our life. You know, in my desperation to be like Jesus, that's what I see. I want to follow his example. It doesn't matter if he was with a Herod or if he was with a little girl. He looked at their needs. So if we can use our faith in that authority, but all authority in heaven and earth, if we can just learn to use that, to leverage that, to release it, we'll follow in his footsteps. And this isn't our job, it isn't our calling, it isn't our duty, it's our opportunity.
Yes.